The Talmud, just a few words. The Talmud was a certain codification of not just Jewish laws, but Jewish traditions, thoughts, and way of life. First came the early part, the Mishnah, started being jellified from late first century through the end of the second century Common Era. Then came the following the future further codification. In parallel, in discussion between the Babylonian rabbis and the rabbis that carried the thought of the school of the Holy Land that lay base to the so-called two Talmuds, Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, and the Jerusalem Talmud, Yerushalmi. It's a misnomer. It was not written anywhere in or even near Judea, but mostly is attributed to the school of thought of rabbis from Tiberia and Caesarea or Caesarea. Jerusalem Talmud is the Babylonian Talmud's older brother, in a sense, and usually when there is any sort of discrepancy, the halacha, the actual rule, follows the Babylonian Talmud and not the Jerusalem Talmud. It's also studied at much greater length and depth, especially in the yeshivot, in the Orthodox world. The reason being, the Roman rule of the time finally expelled and shut down the yeshivot by mid-4th century of the Common Era. And the Jerusalem Talmud had not been yet fully codified. So they kind of grabbed it in a helter-skelter fashion and put out whatever they had. While the Babylonian rabbis in the East, they saw, of course, the Jerusalem Talmud as the Western Talmud, because it was West for them, or Southwest. They took their time. It took over 150 years, and just towards the year 500, they put out the full codification. The way the Jerusalem Talmud is built, there are 6 main chapters, 6 orders, as they're known. You know the word order in Hebrew, right? Seder, exactly, that's what we have on Pesach. Same thing, Seder of Talmud, Seder of Mishnah, or Sdarim in plural, and there are 6 of them. Shisha Sdarim, or known as Shas, it's an acronym. Now, the Shas, there are 6 orders, each addresses a particular aspect, particular angle of Jewish life. The first one, Zeraim, deals mainly with the laws that have to do with the land, particularly the Holy Land. The next one, Moed, has to do with observation of special days, Shabbos, Yom Tov, fasts, birthdays, well, maybe not quite birthdays, but you get the gist, and so on. We're only going to concentrate on the 5th order of the Talmud here, known as Kodshim, or the Holies. It is dedicated to the sacrificial offerings, the services at the temple, and also to the dietary laws, the laws of kashrut, although they do not immediately or directly connect with the temple service, were also presented in Kodshim. It is important to mention that because Jerusalem Talmud was rather abruptly finished before the Babylonian one, not only is it not as perhaps completely thought through, but it's also lesser in volume. Not every Mishnah tractate in each order has a Babylonian Talmud, even a Gemara, so to speak, addressing it. But there are even fewer tractates that are addressed by the Jerusalem Talmud. Meaning sometimes there is a tractate of Mishnah written, and there is no corresponding ongoing conversation between the later sages, known as Amoraim, plural, singular Amora, the sage of the Gemara of the post-Mishnaic period. So in other words, you will find many tractates that do have a Babylonian Talmud discussion with them, but do not have a Jerusalem Talmud discussion. So far, so good, right? All clear? But there is a suggestion, a suspicion, at certain times, perhaps a certainty, that at one point, pre-printing, the Jews had greater number of Jerusalem Talmud tractates, some of which have been lost. Most particularly, you saw it coming, most particularly, all of the Jerusalem Talmud tractates on the Seder of Kodshim. We have none of them. Moreover, when Daniel van Bomberg, thank you, comes to print the Jerusalem Talmud for the first time ever, Jerusalem Talmud gets printed in Venice in 1523-1524. He is using the one and only manuscript known as the complete manuscript of Jerusalem Talmud, the so-called Leiden manuscript. To this day, it's in the library of the University of Leiden. No, you cannot touch it, you cannot even see it, but we believe it's still there. Some people do get to see it, the lucky one. If you do, let me know. He copies it off Leiden manuscript with great precision, great attention to detail, and he writes there, I do not print any of the, he needs to explain it all because this is just the dawn of the printing. People who look for books, they don't even know what to expect and what they cannot get. He writes, I do not give you any of the tractates on the Order of Kodshim because we don't have them. But there is circumstantial evidence pointing out that Jerusalem Talmud on Kodshim did exist. First of all, Maimonides, in the very late 12th century, while finally editing his foreword to Mishnah Torah, writes down that both Bavli and Yerushalmi, both Babylonian and Jerusalem Talmud, were written only on the 5 orders in full, while the 6th one, called Taharot, the order of ritual purity, has only one tractate addressed in Babylonian and Jerusalem Talmud, namely Nida. Okay, with that revelation, it seems more or less obvious, unless it's a typo, it's a miswriting, unless we don't understand something. It seems that in the days of Maimonides, the very end of 12th and in the beginning of 13th century, he died in 1204, he did have access to Jerusalem Talmud on Kodshim. In the 13th century, we have Meiri, we have Ridvaz, David of Duran from Algiers, so both we have a rabbi from Germany and a rabbi from North Africa, who both seem to be appealing to those tractates from Jerusalem Talmud, or even quoting it. Again, it's not very cut and dry, but at least would appear to be so. So they must have gone lost somewhere between the beginning of, in the middle of 14th and early 16th century. By the time 19th century comes, there is already a very vivid conversation on whether they even existed. We're Jewish, we can't do without argument, without machlokes. Within the movement that predates the Haskalah, this Wissenschaft des Judentum, right? That's Leopold Zunz. And again, in their midst, there is also a dispute, and many arguments are brought to either side. All this was foreword and preamble. And now we get to our point, and the year is 1905. And the country is the Austro-Hungarian Empire, mostly the area that today is Romania. But not just. It goes as far as Pressburg. Does anyone know what Pressburg is? Pressburg is Bratislava, today's capital of Slovakia. And as far east as Lemberg. What's Lemberg? Anyone knows? Lvov. Excellent, of course. Lvov or Lviv, today's western Ukraine. A man enters the town of Hust. Hust is, again, today's Romania, fairly northern Romania, quite close to Satu Mare, known perhaps to some of you as Satmar, exactly. You know the Satmar Hasidim? Yeah, they come from that very place. This man is wearing 2 sets of tefillin on his head, which may sound strange, but in the day was a very common custom for many Sephardic Jews, many Jews from the Orient. And he will speak nothing but Sephardic Hebrew. He is clearly a learned man. He approaches the Rosh Yeshiva of the clan Grunwald. They are to the day, the Grunwald lineage are the Hasidic Rabbis of Hasidut Papa, the Hasidic court of Papa, a small shtetl in that same area, and introduces himself as Rabbi Shlomo Yehudah Algazi, a Sephardic rabbi from Turkey, and he wants to stay and study. And he is, of course, very welcome to. He is a learned man, he is a shrewd man. He managed already to pick some German on his way through Germany. And he's obviously a quick learner by all and any standards. But he has an amazing story to tell. More than that, he is bringing a treasure with him. It doesn't all come out in one sitting. He doesn't blurt it out. It comes out slowly in portions, but then when it comes, it pours out. You see, Rabbi Algazi's brother, who is a merchant in Turkey, and by the way, by that time, Algazi translated his name into German/Yiddish. He calls himself Shlomo Yehudah Friedlander, so it will be easier for the Yeshiva Bochrim to address him or to name him without butchering his name. So, Algazi's brother, Eliyahu, went to Izmir, or Smyrna, as it was known in the day, together with his partner, Yaakov Kuba. And the partner, Yaakov Kuba, met an offspring of the noble Sephardic family, a famous clan, Benevishte, Suleiman Benevishte. And this very Suleiman Benevishte had a manuscript dating back to 1202, which was given to him in strict confidence and for a huge, unbelievable deposit by Rabbi Abraham Halevi, who bought it off a priest somewhere out west, presumably northern Italy. Now, Rav Algazi explains and warns that never, even in his wildest dreams, was he allowed to actually purchase the manuscript or even handle it really. But for an extraordinary and unthinkable amount of money, so that his entire family chipped in to pay the ransom, they were allowed to copy this manuscript in the presence of Suleiman ben Avishta, and in huge haste, because Suleiman ben Avishta had to go back and return the manuscript to Abraham Halevi. Are you still following? There are a lot of people here, right? At any rate, Rav Shlomo Yehudah Algazi, first of all, publishes a scholarly work on the Jerusalem Talmud, addressing a totally different tractate, a well-known tractate of Yevamot. Then he is preparing the world for the Enlightenment, for the day of publishing of Jerusalem Talmud of Kodshim. He goes from one rabbi to another. He is a man of great charm, great charisma. He is a much respected by now scholar, albeit Sephardic, but he does start speaking German and Yiddish better and better. He is a fast learner. He strikes friendship with Rabbi Eli Yehudah Algazi, who later became the Rabbi of Columbus, Ohio. He is the younger son of the Rabbi of Papa, so he never became the Hasidic Rebbe of Papa, but he was a great historian, rabbi, and scholar throughout his death in the 1950s. Now, when you want to publish a sacred book, a holy book, especially something as prominent as a piece of Talmud that has been lost previously, you need letters of empowerment from the rabbis. That's how things work. They are called haskamot. Well, in Sephardic Hebrew, in Ashkenazi Hebrew, they are called haskamas. So you go to a rabbi. Once he agrees to give you the haskama for your book, you're good, but the more you can collect from the more prominent rabbi, the better you have it made. Now we'll take a step back and talk a little bit about the theological demographic or ideological demographics of the Jews of Eastern and Central Europe at the dawn of last century. There is something we have to understand, we have to remember, and we have to go way back to grasp it. First of all, early 17th century, there is a famous, notorious Messianic movement that springs from Judaism, exactly known as the Sabbatianism, the movement of Shabbatai Tzvi, that continues even after the Turkish Sultan tells Shabbatai Tzvi to choose between converting to Islam or accepting immediate death, and he doesn't pretend to hesitate. He embraces Islam immediately, and lives through the rest of his life in the town of Ulcin, that's today's Montenegro, northeastern Montenegro. And after that, even the Sabbatians who hear the news about his converting to Islam either refuse to believe it or claim that he is merely testing their faith, and Sabbatianism carries on and on. fast forward over 100 years, there is a huge controversy brewing up in the area of Hamburg and Altona. Two very famous, hugely respected rabbis, Rav Yonasan Eibschitz and Rav Yaakov Emden, are at each other's throats. It starts with Rav Yonasan Eibschitz presenting a few Jews, a few followers, and he was just chosen to become the rabbi of the three cities of Altona, Wangerhask, and Hamburg. He moves from Prague. He presented some people with amulets, some Kabbalistic amulets that he made. Rabbi Emden starts to claim emphatically that Yonasan Eibschitz is a closeted Sabbatinist, or semi-closeted. And the wave is huge. It's a wave, it's a controversy that engulfs all of Ashkenazi Jewry. People start defining themselves as pro-Eibschitz, pro-Emden, pro-Eibschitz against Emden. Majority of the Jews in place in Hamburg vicinity are pro-Eibschitz, and Rav Emden is also from the same area. They're practically neighbors. Also, well, the things they tell about each other are, they don't end with claims of heresy. For instance, in the Prince of Rav Emden that you will find to this day, he claims that Rav Yonasan Eibschitz was cohabiting with his own daughter, although some say that it was added by a reprint who wanted. Again, there is the Machlokes is huge. It's also the era of the rise of Hasidism. Rav Yonasan Eibschitz is entirely out of the Hasidic world. Rav Yaakov Emden, although he never became an official Hasid, is very close to Hasidism, and he is promoting aesthetic way of living and piety and care and simplicity in everything. For a while he was expelled from Hamburg and he had to appeal to the crown that reinstated him, and the fallout was huge. It continued even after the death of Rav Yonasan Eibschitz in 1764, for a few years at least. And why am I telling you all of this if we are now in 1905, 1906? Because the cloud is still there. Because the cracks that started there in 1750s never healed. Those wounds didn't get a chance to grow back. Nobody licked them properly. And so, if you've gone to one rabbi, remember also the Hasidic and Lithuanian or Misnagdische Yeke Jewry are also amidst a great conflict, and you can appeal to one side, and then, well, you'll probably antagonize at least some of the adepts of the other. How can you use that to your benefit? Well, imagine that you went to a Hasidic rabbi, and he told you that he was uncomfortable with giving you a haskama, with authorizing you, with giving support to your publishing. Next, you go to the rabbi, with him that rabbi is at odds, and you tell him, I brought a holy sacred treasure all the way from the east, and I was so hoping that Rabbi such and such will authorize my book, but I don't know, don't think he liked me. Maybe it's because I'm Sephardic, I don't know, but he didn't like me. Can you help me? Do you have an advice for me? And thus, Shlomo Yehudah Algazi keeps rolling this snowball on and on. He also befriends the owner of a small but growing publishing house, Yaakov Vider. His publishing house is fairly new, and it existed throughout the Holocaust. Yaakov Vider himself was murdered on the train to Auschwitz. At the time, he is a young and idealistic publisher, not very wealthy, reasonably well-to-do, still just got on his feet. And he is very enthusiastic about the project. Friedlander, also, well, I call him Algazi and Friedlander intermittently. We will see what his real name was yet. Maybe. Friedlander starts writing, preparing the Yidden of the world to the publishing of the first volume. And he writes the so-called proclamation, or even perhaps the literary translation would be exclamation, Kol Koreh. Eventually, it will be found out that he publishes the Kol Koreh in two versions. One goes to the rabbis of Eastern Europe, pretty much everywhere except Russia, which has its own mind there. The rabbis there are stricter and marching to their own drums at the time, telling them the amazing story of the manuscript thought lost for the world having been salvaged. The other version goes to the known scholars and researchers of the time, such as Solomon Buber in Lemberg. He's the grandfather of Martin Buber. Solomon Schechter in New York, telling them more in detail, more in precision, the implications, the exciting novelty that the Jerusalem Talmud will show, not only from the viewpoint of halacha, but also from the viewpoint of what we know about the history, customs, and traditions of the Holy Land Jewry in the 3rd, 4th century Common Era. At the same time, in the one he writes for the scholars, he's asking for funding. He says that they're struggling because actually it's interesting, in correspondence with Solomon Schechter, he is blaming most of the delays later, and there are more than a dozen of back and forth letters. He's blaming it on the publisher, saying that the publisher is dragging his heels, and to Solomon Buber, who is nearby in Lemberg, he's praising Yaakov Vider. He's saying, I have a great publisher who works day and night, he sacrifices everything that he has, but we still need the funding to get this colossal project airborne. And Schechter actually sent him some significant sums of money. We don't know exactly how much, finally. But in 1907, the first volume of the Jerusalem Talmud to Algazi does see world. It's Jerusalem Talmud on 2 tractates, Hulin, which deals with the laws of shchita and kashrut of animals, mostly meat, and Bechorot, which deals with the laws regarding firstborn, both human and animals, firstborn. Once it comes out, there is a great joy just amidst, simple scholars, not the highest grade rabbis, but everyone is expecting it. Throughout Russian Empire, including Poland, it was sold for 2 rubles and 50 kopecks, and for extra 80 kopecks you could also buy the glorified edition with leather trim and gilt on the side. That's when, the first excitement is somewhat dampened. There are some apparent controversies. Not huge at first, but it doesn't sit very clear. It's first of all, there are some differences hard to reconcile between this Talmud and particular parts in Babylonian Talmud, but that's nothing much. That's actually normal. You'd be surprised if it didn't happen at all. It's like having 5 witnesses of a road accident who all say the same thing. Ask any police officer, they tell you, highly suspicious. Moreover, so when you have hundreds of rabbis. But there are some things that are unclear. Then again, first of all, Jerusalem Talmud is not written in exactly the same language as Babylonian Talmud. It's written in the Western dialect of Aramaic, which any average yeshiva bocher knows far less fluent in. Then the first word of protest comes above, and then we already see 2 camps shaping up, the pro-Friedlander rights and anti-Friedlander rights. I'm not going to repeat this tongue twister. But on the pro side, for instance, we see Rav Shalom Mordechai Schwadron from Galicia. At the time he was also in Lemberg. He was so excited, his children retold later that he danced with this volume when he received him by mail, and he also met personally beforehand with Friedlander, and he really loved having it. Rabbi Eliezer Deutsch from Bonhad in Hungary, who keeps giving those letters of support, those Haskamas. We mentioned already Rabbi Yehudah Grunwald. He is truly invaluable in piecing this story together. He was born in 1890, meaning he was in his late teens when he met and befriended Friedlander Algazi and helped him in many ways, introduced him to people, helped him writing letters, was also very excited. Went on till 1912 when Rabbi Kutziel Grunwald was drafted into Hungarian army 2 years before World War I. We'll get back to him because it's his writings from 1940s and 50s when he recollects the story fill huge gaps in what actually happened and how Friedlander was able to pull off what he did pull off. Now, yes, I know you were not expecting spoilers, but since the talk tonight was actually titled The Man Who Forged Jerusalem Talmud, that may have been a giveaway in some ways, that actually Algazi's brother Eliyahu, nor his partner Yaakov Kuba, nor the offspring of the noble clan Beneviste, Suleiman, nor the mysterious Avraham Alevi, which sounds like John Smith pretty much, nor the unnamed Catholic priest from whom he purchased the manuscript ever existed. nor in fact did, of course, Shlomo Yehudah Algazi. It was just a name he came up with. But he clearly, by any measure and account, was a skilled forger and a true scholar. It took more than just an effort. It took perspicacity, knowledge, patience to put it all together, to piece it all together. Just imagine if he turned all that energy to something actually useful as well as noble, how far he could have gone. At any rate, there is also the category of anti-Friedlanderites. The first one to sound alarm is Dr. Wilhelm Bacher. You may have heard of him. He is a very serious and major Jewish scholar, researcher, historian. He looks at it and he's analyzing it linguistically. He's looking at the realities and he says things don't match here. Rabbi Dov Aryeh Ritter, he's the chief rabbi of Rotterdam, he goes further than that. He's the first one to come out and call a spade a spade. He says this is a fake. At least the first published that we can follow, and it's fairly soon, it's within 2 to 4 months after the publishing, after it goes out. There is a lovely story about Rogachover, Rabbi Yosef Rosin, also known as the genius of Rogachov, the Gaon Merogachov. And the way the story goes, when Rogachover outed Friedlander's fake, his disciples brought to him the tractate, this first volume, and he read it overnight. Well, it's famous and well known that Rogachover would read books diagonally at the rate of about 40 seconds per page and would remember it by heart. And in the morning, he told them that it was a fake. They asked, how did he know? And he said, because there is no hapax legomena. Have your attention. It's a Greek term. Yes, Rogachover also had a knack for languages. Does anyone know what hapax legomena is?
A one-off.
Perfect. One word off, right? Hapax legomenum, in singular, legomena in plural, is a word or a term that appears only in one work and does not appear anywhere else. For example, honorific habilitud habilitus, it's Shakespeare, Love's Labour Lost, you can check it out. It's also the longest English word with alternating consonants and vowels. Appears only once in only one work of Shakespeare's. That's a hapax legomenum. Okay? Now, what was Rogachover referring to? Apparently, in every single tractate of the Talmud, be it Babylonian or Jerusalem, at least one Amoram, at least one sage is mentioned, who is not mentioned in any other tractate. In most tractates, there is more than one, but one exists in every single one. But, you can tell where this is going. Not in the 4 tractates, because there was a second volume that followed, of Friedlanders. In fact, in none of the tractates of Friedlanders is there a sage mentioned whom he just invented and who doesn't appear anywhere else. He was too careful. He was too perfect. He was too clean. Sadly, it's an urban legend. It does not appear in the original edition of Tzafnat Paneach, magnum opus of Rogachover. It did not appear in Rogachover's letters on the details of the Jerusalem Talmud. Apparently, it's an apocryphic discovery, a brilliant one, a gorgeous one. I wish it were true, but with certain measure of academic honesty, we cannot say it actually was. Sadly, Friedlander mostly was found out through argumenta ad hominem, through arguments about personality of either his own or other people. He had to invent a whole army of people, right? And of course, people start looking around, they start asking questions. Where is this Benevishte? Benevishte is a well-known, recognized, and well-spread clan. Where is this particular Suleiman Benevishte? Yaakov Kuba, Avraham Alevi. Can anyone introduce us to them? One extremely wealthy individual from Vienna offers an unheard of prize of 10,000 crowns to anyone who will present to the public any of those personalities. They come to Benevishte. He says, okay, well, let's start with my brother. And he writes a letter. And 2 months later, Rav Yehudah Algazi recalls, he comes to visit Algazi, Friedlander, and he's sitting Shiva. His brother, Nebuch Eliyahu, passed away suddenly. Azoi. So, yes, if you invent too many people, you have to start killing them off, right? That's one of the downsides. If you were a doctor, you could bury your mistakes, but a rabbi has to, yeah. Meanwhile, the Talmud still sells in both meanings. Chofetz Chaim, the great Chofetz Chaim, Rabbi Meir Yitzchak Efradim, believes it so much that he starts wearing tefillin Rabbeinu Tam. Now it's important to explain, there are 2 different varieties of tefillin. Yeah, nothing is straightforward with us Jews, right? It is described precisely, we know what should be the texts written, well, in 1 scroll on the hand tefillin and 4 scrolls in the head tefillin. But in what order should they be there? That is a machloket, a dispute between 2 great early sages, early rabbis of the 11th century, Rabbeinu Shlomo Yitzchaki, Rashi, and his grandson, Rabbeinu Tam. Mainly, it's about the order of 2 of the 4 paragraphs, Shema Yisrael and V'haya in Shamoah. Which is on the far right and which is second from the right. And there are tefillin Rashi and there are tefillin Rabbeinu Tam. And some Sephardic Jews would wear both. And some, for instance, Chabad Jews, they take off after the prayer Rashi and they put on another set of Rabbeinu Tam. Majority of Chabadniks. Now, Chofetz Chaim, under the influence of Friedlander's creation, started putting on Rabbeinu Tam. And his son could not forgive it to Friedlander to the end of his life. By the way, he wrote very aggressive, very passionate things about it. So now scholars are a bit at a loss, especially the ones who loved the idea so much, who welcomed the tractate. Rabbi Menachem Ziemba, another great rabbi, he was murdered 2 days after the beginning of Warsaw Ghetto uprising shot on the street trying to cross it to safety. Rabbi Menachem Ziemba wrote on the margins. He didn't know what to do with this tractate anymore, with this Talmud. He thought maybe he should burn it as heresy, or maybe he should bury it because it still contained words of holiness. Or maybe he should keep it to protect it because it still had an interesting collection of Jerusalem Talmud texts, but then there was a concern that people might think that it's a true Jerusalem Talmud later. Then again, in a while, he said, it's by now has been well publicized that it's not true Jerusalem Talmud. So again, the question of whether to bury or burn it, he made the Jewish choice and sold it eventually. He even writes to whom he sold it. It was published by his grandson about 20 years ago, in the 90s. Now, with all this mayhem, all this back and forth, Friedlander is definitely pulling no punches. He publishes some vile booklets, again throwing arguments in the face of his critics. And in 1909, the second volume comes out, holding yet another 2 tractates. All in all, there are 11 tractates, by the way, in the Order of Kodshim, and he's hinting there is a third, or will be a third one in the making. But the ground is burning under his feet. There still are people who believe him. There are people who don't believe him but like him and will support him to an extent. Rabbi Eli Yehudah Grunwald, again remember, he's but a teen. He was born in 1890. He's barely 20 maybe, or pushing his 20s. He is supportive of him to an extent, and many of those responsae by Friedlander, they usually come under also fictitious names. One was published by an Avraham Rosenberg, the disciple of the great Rabbi Shlomo Yehudah Algazi. Another by somebody named Ben Rabbi Yosef, and so on. And they also have very sardonic names usually, such as the Punishing Sword, one work of refutation of his critics. Another is called And Thou Shalt Respond to the Dullard, and so on. And that is response to the very to the point, actually, not at all ad hominem article by Rav Meir Tzvi Plotsky. It's just put in perspective who the dullard in the metaphor was. And then it gets worse yet, because it comes through many questions about his personality also. For instance, it's very interesting, how did he manage so quickly to master Yiddish? But moreover, how did he manage so quickly to master Lithuanian Yiddish in Hungary? Then in late 1910, approximately, the word comes by from the town of Mulhouse, that's Alsace, near Metz. Apparently, well, I'll give you one more spoiler, the greatest uninterrupted achievement of Friedlander was having been a fishmonger in Mulhouse for all of 14 years in a row. Where he did try to sell off as an original an amulet allegedly created by, once again we're closing the circle, Rabbi Yonasan Eybeschutz, which proved that Rabbi Yonasan Eybeschutz was a follower of Shabbatai Tzvi, who is mentioned in the amulet. Moreover, the amulet stayed with the rabbi in Mulhouse who caught on to the fraud, and it showed that Friedlander even learned how to age the paper to make it look a couple 100 years older. That was check and made in one. You could see Yehudah still tries to cover to help his older friend, though he knows by now, beyond any reasonable doubt, that it's total fraud. But then, that same year, Rabbi Grunwald marries the daughter of Rabbi Horowitz of Hermannstadt, who is amidst the fiercest critics of Friedlander, and he makes an ultimatum. He tells Friedlander that he has to rather retract or everything comes out. Friedlander would not retract, and then the natural manure and matter did meet with the oscillating electric device. Yeah, it hit the fan. Friedlander himself died in Vienna in 1923. He was born in Belarus, in Beshenkovichi, and bore an unusual name, Zuzke Rocholea. It's very, seriously, it's very uncommon. With Christians, especially Catholics, you will see somebody named Maria, a male. Rainer Maria Rilke, for instance, right? Or Bertha. But it's very uncommon in Eastern Ashkenazi Jewish tradition. At any rate, that was his name. There were some other stories with him. There are two questions. How did he manage to do it, and why did he do it? Well, by how, there is more than one answer, there is more than one contributing factor. First of all, Jerusalem Talmud is much less well known amidst scholars and rabbis than Babylonian Talmud. He would be very unlikely to be able to pull it off with Babylonian Talmud for longer than half a day. Secondly, he was very, very careful. Well, as the anecdote reported of Rogachev tells us, even too careful. He would take the existing pieces from other Jerusalem Talmud, the existing tractates, rewrite them, modify them also slightly, and then put them together in sequence, and only make things up when there was really nothing to make on the issue. But so stylistically, it did work for him very well. Thirdly, he played on the vulnerability of that very theological drift that we mentioned, right? And there always will be some people who would not look further beyond Haskamas from important rabbis, from great authorities. As you see, not everybody though. As for why, your guess is as good as mine. It couldn't have been just for money or honor, or even both, because, well, the honor he could have had just as easily as Rabbi Algazi writing his scholarly articles on the existing Jerusalem Talmud, which have been published even before. As for money, well, there are easier ways to earn money, that's for sure. My guess would be, and as a hereditary prankster, I do understand that pintele about him. My guess would be he did it because he couldn't not do it. Because he was a great artist of scam. because he was this Stradivari or Mozart of forgery. Because he had this need, this craving of succeeding. Because he wanted so much to pull it off. And yes, there is another variant. Some say that he did it to snub the rabbis because he was sympathetic to the movement of Haskalah. It's very possible. It's you never know what's inside there. He did fake 2 other small manuscripts and promptly planted them in the library of Metz. In both Maharal, Rabbi Yehudah Leib of Prague appears. One is the story of Golem of Prague, and the other is the Hound of Baskervilles, rewritten so as to match Maharal of Prague, move the entire story. Yep, there you go. Indeed, it's not a cow, it's a hound, but otherwise quite the story. And before I finish, I promised it would be an hour, and we'll take some questions if you wish. I wanted to share with you one of the big treasures from my collection. I bought them at an auction in New York almost 15 years ago. This is the first volume of Friedlander's fake Talmud. Extremely rare by now. Those who didn't burn it buried it oftentimes. It says Chulin in Talmud Yerushalmi, and later on in the middle you find Bechorot. In here, the inscription reads, with the comments and remarks from the great Rabbi Shalom Mordechai Cohen, that's Rabbi Shalom Mordechai Schwadron. His grandson, Rabbi Shalom Schwadron, was later known as the Maggid of Jerusalem. And he writes, all of those collected and edited by myself, Shlomo Yehudah, Samech Tet, standing for pure Sephardis, Faradi Tahor, the youngest and smallest to the noble clan of Algazi, known also as Friedlander. I show it sometimes to friends, but very few chosen ones. Never let anyone handle it. In the second volume, published in 1909, he also puts in a facsimile of the original. Excuse me. One moment. You can't read much, and you can't tell how original the original is, but if not original, it is definitely novel. Any questions?
How long would it have taken him to put together something like that?
Oh, that's a good question, but probably years. It was a long process. Maybe, he was a fishmonger by day, and
How many different were written? How many different Torahs were written?
You mean tractates from Yerushalmi?
Yes.
He published 4 fake ones. Yes, 4 fake tractates. Yes. Later, some rabbis referred to his work as the fake Talmud of the fake pure Sephardi. him.
Is somebody writing a screenplay on this?
Well, since you asked, yes, I did start working with a particular Hollywood producer, but then I cut ties with him amidst all sorts of insinuations that so if you know someone else who would be interested.
So how many different
Marilyn.
No, I just want to know why did you do it? To get money or why?
Why did he do it?
Why, yeah.
Well, we talked about it. Your guess is as good as mine. Probably because he was a master and, you know, it's, no, you don't have to be a psychopath to be a fraud. You think all frauds are psychopaths?
No, but to go to such lengths,
Yeah, I mean,
it's just a...
He was obsessive compulsive probably, so good for him.
Just to get away with it, basically, that was part of
Yeah, maybe because he could, maybe to see whether he could.
Get away with it, and get away with it, yeah.
Yeah, Arthur.
Is the extent of the content that is fraudulent, is it highly fraudulent in terms of the message of getting across what the gist of the tractates are, or is it not too fraudulent? Meaning, well, you know, is it getting the same message across as...
Well, it is not an original Jerusalem Talmud written on the tractates of the Order of Kodshim. That we can say with yes certainty. As for the message, you're asking me a theological question. For instance, you probably will find a rabbi who will say, you will find a rabbi who will hold any viewpoint. So you could find a scholar, a rabbi, who would say that yes, it was a fraud, but it was made under divine guidance so that we will get finally exactly the words and even the letters that we need to have as Yerushalmi. I would not care to either embrace or disavow that approach, but again, it's a theological approach to an historic statement. Well, in that case, yes, Russ?
So he did it, there was a fraud, yes, but there, any other errors found, or no other errors in doing it? No errors, like,
Oh yes, plenty,
oh, so they did.
but not hugely gaping ones. Not errors that would block the printing immediately at the beginning, uprooting the very attempt to...
I thought that if there was a mistake, like a mistake as far as letters or whatever, you are not allowed to make mistakes.
No, that's the Torah you're thinking of, not, but in the Talmud, and anyway, the Torah you compare it to another scroll,
Yes.
but the tractate that was lost for 700 years, what do you get to compare it to? It's, and it's also the excitement. So many scholars and rabbis and simple Jews believed it to be true because they so very much wanted it to be true. Like Ridbaz, the famous Kabbalist in Sfat, when he received his volume, first volume of Friedlander's tractate, he wore white clothes and blessed Shehechianu. They were so excited. Sheldon.
Okay, so the Yerushalmi, you say it, Talmud, that's only Hebrew? Is there Aramaic in it?
No Hebrew. It's all Western dialect of Aramaic.
Oh,
It is
Western.
different from the Eastern Aramaic or Babylonian Aramaic, in which the Babylonian Talmud is written.
Yeah.
It's a more literary Aramaic. It's closer somewhat to the so-called Syriac, also known as Pshita, But they're different dialects of Aramaic. They're not Hebrew.
So then he had to know Aramaic. He's a fishmonger. He had to be pretty much of a scholar.
Well, apparently he went to Volozhin Yeshiva in his youth.
Uh-huh.
And, anybody can sell fish. It's not, at least in those days, and in Mulhouse, it was not a gold seal profession. And, yes, he definitely was a scholar. No question about that. He managed to pass himself as a scholar in yeshiva, although it was easier because many things were overlooked or forgotten because of the cultural differences.
It's like that recent guy, the movie about it, who pretended to be a doctor in all these different occupations.
Catch Me If You Can, about Frank Abagnale. Frank Abagnale is an actual personality, by the way. Featured by Leonardo DiCaprio.
So
Yes.
he was very smart in order to, and he also succeeded as a doctor.
Oh yes.
He
Oh
didn't
yes.
kill
Can
people.
you imagine how far he could have gone if he chose an honest occupation and pursued it? Right. That's the thing. Anybody who has the skill, the stamina, the ability to carry something like that out deserves much better. That's the waste. That's the tragedy.
So how many copies roughly were printed?
We do not know because in those days they didn't put the numbers on it, but it was in the low thousands at the
Okay,
time.
and were they signed at all? Any of them?
Not to my knowledge. It's extremely uncommon for a Talmud to be signed. Actually, I remember years ago, back in St. Catherine's, one boy, when I gave him the Tanakh for his bar mitzvah, asked me to sign it. And I wondered, who did he think I was? No, none of them signed to my knowledge.
How many different
One
versions?
second. No, Esther.
I don't
sorry.
understand, if he was a fishmonger, why the people believe that this person would have in his possession something that would be 700 years old?
Nobody knew he was a fishmonger.
Yeah.
Nobody knew he was from Mulhouse.
Um,
He didn't say he was Zuzkerochalea either. He said he was a Turkish rabbi from the noble family of Algazi. And the internet was glitchy. They were still in the dial-up days.
Yeah.
Frank,
Well, how many different versions were there?
only one.
One.
Thank God, only one.
Is there any value in what is in that? Like, is
You mean monetary? Yes, it's extremely rare.
not monetary, but in the writings of it, is there anything that can be?
That's a good question. I'll give you a Jewish answer. Is that okay? Are we allowed to give a Jewish answer in the show? Yes and no. The writings themselves might carry some artistic value of, wordsmithery. But when Rogachover and Rav Meir Tzviplovsky decided to address the discrepancies they found between Friedlander's work and the Babylonian Talmud, they didn't stop there. They carried on throughout Yerushalmi, and they brought up a whole lot of stuff that may have gone unnoticed and did not prompt such a scholarly work. So indirectly, yes.
So, Rabbi, when he was exposed as a fraud, what happened to him? I mean, were
That's
charges
very
brought?
no.
But he was shamed in
charges.
front of everybody?
Yes, he lost credibility.
And then
he-
what happened? Then he just
He
sort of...
left. We know he died in Vienna. We know he kept still publishing refutations. He had a son by name of Meir who published a refutation as late as 1930. That would be 7 years after Friedlander's death. And he died at the age of 63 then, because he was born in 1860.
So, Rabbi, how do we
But
how do we know that those tracks ever existed if it's not there?
we don't. Maybe they didn't. It's an existing opinion. That is still a subject to opinion and argument. There is evidence to either side. Moreover, most scholars today probably believe they never existed, in spite of the circumstantial evidence from Maimonides, Meir, and Ribas. But
Are there translations?
no, but
I mean,
if
if
you
I wanted to
can
look it up,
find
if
a
I wanted-
sponsor, we can definitely invest in the project.
No, but if I wanted to look it up in the internet and read his work, could I?
I
I
doubt
tried
it.
today. I
You
Googled-
see, the Talmud generally, Babylonian Talmud was only really, they started translated it under Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz some 30 years ago. Jerusalem Talmud, if you're scholarly enough to study Jerusalem Talmud, by now you're fairly confident with your Aramaic. So but I remember there was somebody, a Christian guy interested in different cultures, who called me and asked if they could buy Babylonian Talmud in paperback.
Well, there is a 1-volume or 2-volume digest in paperback.
Digest, well,
So
I wonder how do you digest a code of 20 volumes in paperback? It's interesting. Yeah, well, encyclopedias also exist.
I
And
think there's a Cicino, right? Is that the publisher?
Soncino. Soncino Press from Padua.
The
Yes.
Talmud, and you can get it online, and it's online from a Nazi site. Because they
Okay.
want to show how the Jews are so terrible. That's why they publish.
Yes, the Nazi side is not entirely precise, I must warn you.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, it could be an interesting hagiographic study of the Talmud through the prism of Mein Kampf, but that's an entirely different
Yeah.
cup of tea. Sorry.
I just want to know where you hide your notes.
Oh, okay.
You weren't close enough.
To you?
The notes.
All right.
And it's one page.
Okay.
It's amazing.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. But okay. If you want to know the truth, I make it up as I go.
Rabbi, have you given this exact talk before?
No. But I told the story before, yes?
I said.
Not following the same, sorry.
Shalom.
And,